All right, so welcome to another deep dive. You know how we do it?
Yeah.
One topic, a stack of information,
Yep.
and we extract the key insights just for you.
That's right.
So today, we're diving into Robinson's Land Corporation.
Oh, RLC.
RLC, that's right.
Big player.
Huge.
Yeah.
And we've got their 2024 annual report,
Okay.
which is their official Form 17A filed December 31st, 2024.
Got it.
We've also got some supplemental info on their auditor fees.
Okay.
So what we want to do today is kind of give you a really good picture of what's happening with RLC.
Yeah.
You know, they are one of the biggest players in Philippine real estate.
Absolutely.
And this report is a really good look into, what they own, how they're performing financially,
Okay.
and even how they're thinking about the future.
Yeah. So let's dive in.
Let's do it.
I think right off the bat,
Yeah.
what's amazing is just how much RLC does.
Right.
They're not just, focused on one little slice of the real estate pie.
Yeah.
They are really covering a lot of ground.
Yeah.
So, of course, you've got the Robinsons malls.
Right. I mean, who hasn't been to a Robinson's mall?
Yeah, they're everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Then there's Robinson's Hotels and Resorts.
Okay.
And that covers a wide range too. So
Okay.
you've got budget-friendly options like
Cool.
GoCo Hotels.
Yeah.
But then they also have, more upscale brands like their Summit Hotels and Grand Summit.
Okay.
And then, they have a really strong presence in office space with Robinson's offices.
Okay.
And of course, on the residential side, they've got both, high-rise buildings through RLC residences.
Yeah.
And then, horizontal housing developments with Robinson's Homes. And it doesn't even stop there. They even have Robinson's Logistics and Industrial, which is focused on, warehouses and industrial facilities.
Okay.
And then finally, they have Robinson's Destination Estates, which are those larger mixed-use developments that combine like residences, offices, and commercial areas.
Yeah. That's a lot.
It really is.
So let's kind of zoom in a bit
Okay.
on their residential division.
Yeah.
Because it seems like a big part of, what they do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So just looking at the numbers as of the end of 2024,
Yeah.
under that RLC Residences brand alone,
Okay.
they had 94 residential condominium buildings, towers, housing projects.
Wow.
But then on top of that, 40 housing subdivisions.
Okay.
And a lot of these are already completed, 106 projects
Wow.
completed.
Right.
And then there are another 28 that are, currently in progress, still being built.
Yeah.
But then what's even more, interesting is they've got a ton of future development projects,
Okay.
that are scheduled to be finished within the next 1 to 6 years.
So they're not slowing down at all.
Not at all.
Wow.
Yeah. Big focus on residential.
Yeah. I mean, that really gives you a sense of the scale of what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us some examples
Yes.
of like the completed projects just so people can kind of
Yeah.
get a feel for the scope?
Absolutely. So, just to pick a few,
Okay.
completed condo towers, for example.
Okay.
The Sapphire Block West Power.
Oh.
That one added 384 units.
Okay.
Then you've got the Tryon,
Okay.
which is a 3-tower development.
Okay.
So Tower 1 has 694 units.
Wow.
Tower 2 is a little bigger, 725 units.
Okay.
And Tower 3 has 636.
So that's a lot of units.
Yeah, a lot of units.
Okay.
And then, there's also the Wellington Courtyard.
Okay.
And that one's a little smaller.
Okay.
It's got 3 buildings, A, B, and C,
Okay.
and they have 34 and 45 units respectively.
Okay. So there's a mix. There's some big ones, there's some smaller ones.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A variety of developments.
All right. So what about on the horizontal side with Robinson's Homes?
Yeah.
Where are they building these communities?
All over the place.
Mhm.
They've got projects in a bunch of different locations,
Yeah.
like Bloomfield's and Novolich's, which is really convenient because it's right behind the Robinson's Place Novolich's mall.
Okay.
So, you've got that retail right there.
Yeah, right there.
Then there's Centennial Place in Quezon City.
Okay.
And that's a townhouse development.
Okay.
It's got 50 units, and the lot sizes there are between 65 and 70 square meters.
Okay.
Then there's Chimes Green Hills,
Okay.
and that one's kind of cool because it's mixed use.
Okay.
It's got a hotel component,
Okay.
and then it's got 24 floors of residential units above that.
Wow. Okay.
And then there's Cirrus, and
Right.
that's their first residential offering in the Bridgetown East Township in Passac City.
Okay.
And then you've got east of Galleria,
Yeah.
which is, strategically located near their Robinson's Galleria or Patigas complex.
Yeah. Makes sense.
And then finally, there's Escalades at 20th Avenue in Quezon City.
Okay.
And that one's a mid-rise project. It's got a really nice tropical garden,
Okay.
and it's got 720 units spread across 6 buildings.
So again, a variety of sizes and types.
Absolutely.
Okay, all over the map.
Yeah, it seems like it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's shift gears now
Okay.
and talk about their office buildings.
Yeah.
Under the Robinsons' offices,
Mm-hmm.
they've been really busy
Yeah,
developing those commercial spaces.
definitely.
So what's the latest there?
Well, as of December 31st, 2024,
Yeah.
they had a total of 32 completed office developments.
Okay.
And the cool thing is, they're not just in like the main business districts. They're all over the country.
Okay.
So you've got Quezon City, Mandaluyong, Cebu Ilocos Norte,
Wow.
Tarlac, Naga Davao, Bacolod Iloilo,
Wow.
you name it.
Yeah, nationwide.
Pretty much.
Wow. Okay.
And they're not done yet.
Right.
They've got some projects under construction right now.
Sure. Yep.
In Pasig, Makati, Taguig.
Okay, so all the busy areas.
Exactly.
Okay.
Let's-
So what can we expect to see, coming up soon? So they're saying that in 2025, we should see a few more premium office developments completed.
Okay.
Specifically, GBF Center 2, Cybergate Iloilo Tower 3, and Cybergate Dumaguete.
Okay.
And, their focus is really on creating spaces that are, premium, accessible, future-ready, and sustainable.
Right. Yeah. Sustainability is a big deal now.
It really is.
Yeah.
And they're really trying to attract those high-quality tenants,
Okay.
BPO companies, multinational companies.
Makes sense.
And they're even, upgrading lobbies and common areas in their existing buildings.
Oh, okay. So they're really kind of
Yeah,
putting a focus on that premium.
exactly. Yeah, they want to stay competitive.
Yeah.
You got to keep up with the times.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So speaking of keeping up with the times, like we were saying, sustainability is huge.
Yeah.
So how are Robinson's offices kind of incorporating that into their buildings?
Yeah, they're taking it really seriously. So they've actually gotten a bunch of their properties certified as green buildings. So a few of them have LEED certification
Okay.
from the U.S. Green Building Council.
Hmm.
So for example, Terra Tower got a gold rating.
Okay.
And then Giga Tower, they all have gold too.
Okay.
And then Iloilo Towers 1 and 2, those are also LEED certified.
Okay.
But then on top of that, they also have 10 buildings
Wow.
that are ADE certified,
Okay.
which is backed by the IFC.
Mm-mm.
So that's Cyberscape Gamma, Cyberscape Beta, Cybergate Galleria, Cebu, Omega Cyberscape, Alpha Cybergate, Sigma, Cybergate Delta 2, Robinson Summit Center, Cybergate Bacolod 2, and Robinson Cybergate Center 1.
Wow. That was a mouthful.
Yeah, that was a lot.
Okay, so they're serious about it.
Yeah, they really are.
Okay.
And they're also, saying that they're committed to minimizing their environmental impact
Okay.
across the board.
Okay.
So they're working on reducing energy use, water use,
Mm-hmm.
and, really thinking about how they use materials.
Okay, so it's a big focus for them.
Definitely. Yeah, it's good for business these days to be sustainable.
Yeah. I mean, it's important to be, environmentally conscious.
Right.
So can you give us a few examples
Uh,
of these certified buildings,
yeah.
just so we can get an idea of like the size and location?
Absolutely. So Cyberscape Alpha and
Right.
Cyberscape Beta are both in Pasig City.
Okay.
And they're pretty big buildings,
Yeah.
26 stories for Alpha and 37 for Beta.
Okay.
Terra Tower, which got the LEE Gold.
Mm-hmm.
That one's in Quezon City.
Okay.
It's got 20 stories.
Okay.
Then there's Robinson's Galleria Cebu office
Yeah.
in Cebu City, and that one's got 4.
Okay.
Robinson's Place Ilocos office in Ilocos Norte also has 4.
Okay.
And then Cyber Sigma,
Right.
that one's in Taguig,
Okay.
and it's got 21 stories.
Okay.
And then Robinson's Lucida office in Tarlac City.
Okay.
That's a smaller one, just 3 stories.
Okay.
But yeah,
Again, variety.
variety.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let's move on to Robinson's Hotels and Resorts,
Yeah.
or RHR.
Yeah.
What's new with them? I noticed they mentioned some food and beverage stuff.
Yeah, so they actually own and operate a bunch
Okay.
of food and beverage outlets
Okay.
in their hotel properties.
Right.
And they launched their own coffee brand
Okay.
called Our Coffee
Okay.
back in June 2024.
Okay.
And now it's available at all their Pafe Summit outlets.
Okay. So they're kind of building their own brands.
Yeah, exactly.
In-house.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay.
And then another thing is they've got an agreement with Roxico Asia Hospitality Corporation
Okay.
for 4 Go hotels.
Okay.
And those are in some pretty strategic locations.
Okay.
Manila Airport Road, Ermita, Manila, Tamal, Quezon City, and North EDSA, Quezon City.
Okay. Covering all the bases.
Yeah.
So Looking at RLC's corporate structure, it seems like
Hmm.
they have a lot of subsidiaries.
Yeah.
And the report mentions a merger that happened a while ago.
Hmm.
What was the reason for that?
So as of the end of 2024, they had 17 subsidiaries. Yeah. All consolidated.
Okay.
And yeah, back in 2009.
They did this big merger with three of their subsidiaries,
Okay.
Robinson's Homes, Inc.,
Okay.
Trine Homes Development Corporation,
Okay.
and Manila Midtown Hotels and Land Corporation.
Okay.
And the main goal there was really to streamline operations.
Okay. Makes sense.
Make things more efficient,
Yeah.
combine resources,
Yeah.
strengthen their financial position.
Okay.
And the good thing was they didn't have to issue any new RLC shares to do it.
Okay. That's good.
Yeah.
So, after that merger, and I guess just over time, what are some of the key subsidiaries that they have now?
Yeah. So after that 2009 merger,
Hmm.
and then, some other companies they've incorporated.
Okay.
Some of the big ones are Robinsons in Inc., which is also known as RII.
Okay.
And then there's RCR, which used to be called RMC,
Okay.
RPMMC, RCL, AAI, AMEI, AMVI, AMVI, GHGI, RLCRL, BPVI, BREE, RLGBLC, RLGBLC, RLPMI, RLFMI, MALDASH, RLII, RLDV, and SPMI.
Wow, that's a lot of letters.
Yeah, it's a long list.
Okay.
But yeah, these subsidiaries help them manage all their different business lines,
Makes sense.
and their assets.
Yeah. So, what about Robinsons in Inc.?
Yeah.
That sounds interesting.
Yeah, so they were incorporated back in 1988,
Okay.
and they're 100% owned by RLC. And their main focus is, developing and operating different types of accommodation,
Okay.
like opertels, inns, motels, condos.
Okay.
And they also do some land and building development.
Right.
They used to operate Robinson's Opertel,
Okay.
but that closed down in 2007.
Okay.
Um,
Okay. So, the report also talks about their support for RL Commercial REIT or RCR.
RCR.
What's the connection there?
So RLC's strategy is to keep adding more of their office spaces
Okay.
to the REIT.
Okay.
And the idea is that this will boost the REIT's earning potential.
Okay. So it's good for the REIT investors.
Exactly.
Okay.
They'll get a nice stream of income.
Yeah.
And for RLC, it's a good way to manage their assets.
Yeah.
Maybe free up some capital.
Right.
While still having a stake.
In those properties.
Okay, exactly.
Okay. And RCR has gotten some awards, right?
Yeah, they have.
They've been recognized.
Yeah. So back in 2022,
Okay.
they got a couple of big awards.
Okay.
They were named the Best Sustainable REIT in the Philippines by the International Investor Awards.
Wow.
And then they also won the Best Philippine REIT Award from the Asset Country Awards.
Okay. Very impressive.
Yeah.
So one of their properties, Cyberscape Gamma,
Yeah.
that was actually the first EDGE-certified REIT building in the Philippines.
Yeah. That's a big deal.
Right.
And EDGE, they really focus on resource efficiency.
Okay.
So energy, water, and the embodied energy in the materials used.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty comprehensive certification.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Mm-hmm.
So what about RL Property Management and RL Fund Management?
Yeah.
What do those subsidiaries do?
So RL Property Management, Inc., or RLPMI,
Okay.
they were incorporated in 2021.
Okay.
And they're fully owned by RLC. And their job is basically to handle all the property management stuff.
Okay.
So, managing leases,
Mm-hmm.
marketing the properties, project management,
Okay.
tenant services, taking care of the buildings.
Okay.
And then RL Fund Management, Inc., or RLFMI,
Okay.
they were also established in 2021.
Okay.
And they're wholly owned by RLC as well.
Okay.
And their focus is on providing fund management services for REITs.
Okay. Makes sense.
Yeah, so they're working within that framework of the Philippine REIT Act.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then there's Maldash Corp,
Yeah.
which sounds very tech-focused.
It is. So they were registered in 2021,
Okay.
100% owned by RLC.
Okay.
And their main thing is providing IT solutions.
Okay.
So they've developed an electronic marketplace for B2B integration and e-commerce.
Okay.
And they also offer solutions for product delivery, fulfillment, logistics,
Okay.
and other digital services.
So RLC is really,
Mhm.
embracing technology.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about their employees now.
Okay.
The report gives some data on their workforce as of the end of 2024.
Right.
So what can we learn from that?
So they break down their employees into permanent and contract workers.
Okay.
And this gives us a good idea of how big each of their divisions is in
Hmm.
terms of operations.
Okay.
So Robinson's Malls, that's their biggest division.
Okay.
They've got a total of 6,505 employees.
Okay.
1,466 of those are permanent.
Okay.
Then you've got Robinson's Hotels and Resorts
Yeah.
with 2,739 employees.
Okay.
And 1,575 of those are permanent.
Okay.
Then there's the residential division
Okay.
with 885 employees total
Okay.
and 555 permanent.
Okay.
Robinson's offices has 719 employees total,
Okay.
139 permanent.
Okay.
And then Robinson's Logistics and Industrial Facilities. That's their smallest division.
Okay.
They've only got 25 employees,
Okay.
and only 4 of those are permanent.
Okay.
So yeah, you can see that malls and hotels,
They need a lot more people.
yeah, more labor intensive.
Exactly.
Okay.
Than some of the other divisions.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So the report also talks about the market conditions.
Yeah.
And, the competition in the real estate industry.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the key takeaways there?
So they point out that office vacancy rates were pretty high
Yeah. Okay.
in 2024.
Okay.
They hit 18% in the third quarter.
Wow. Okay.
But the industry's feeling optimistic.
Okay.
CBRE is projecting that those rates will go down
Okay.
to single digits
Okay.
between 2025 and 2027.
Okay. So that's good news.
Yeah.
So how's RLC planning to deal with this?
So they're really focused on attracting those good tenants
Okay.
by offering, premium spaces that are safe and functional
Mm-hmm.
and sustainable.
Okay.
And they see the IT BPM sector
Okay.
as a really big driver of demand
Okay.
for office space in the future.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what about risks?
What kind of challenges does RLC see?
So they talk about a few things.
Okay.
There's always the risk of another global health crisis.
Right. Yeah. Like the pandemic.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then there's also general economic and political uncertainty, in the Philippines.
Mm.
And these things can really affect consumer spending.
Right.
Construction costs, tourism, mall demand.
Yeah. It could have a ripple effect.
It really can.
Okay.
They also point out that a lot of their real estate investment expenditures are fixed.
Okay.
Things like property taxes,
Yeah.
maintenance, debt repayments.
Right.
So those costs don't really go down.
Even if revenue drops.
Exactly.
That's okay.
And then they also talk about how competitive the real estate industry is,
Mm-hmm.
and how important it is for them to secure affordable land,
Yeah. Especially in the cities.
especially in urban areas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the report also gives some examples of their property locations.
Yeah.
Did you notice any interesting patterns there?
Yeah, so they highlight a few properties in the Visayas and Mindanao regions,
Okay.
and they list what the properties used for and
Mm.
whether there are any encumbrances.
Okay.
And it's interesting because most of the properties they list
Yeah.
don't have any encumbrances.
Okay.
So, for example, in Iloilo, they've got mall, mixed use, and office properties.
Okay.
In Cebu, they have hotel residential and a mixed-use development.
Okay.
Davao del Sur, they have mall, hotel, and an office building.
Okay.
And in Misamis Oriental, they have mall and residential.
Okay. So they're really spread out across the country.
Yeah, they are.
Okay. Let's talk about the regulatory environment a bit.
Okay.
What are some of the rules that RLC has to follow?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for their malls,
Yeah.
they've got to comply with all sorts of local government regulations.
Okay.
So they need permits for a lot of things.
Huh?
They've got to follow fire codes.
Mm-hmm.
They need sanitary permits for their food establishments.
Makes sense.
They need wastewater discharge permits from the DENR.
Yeah.
And then for their residential and commercial subdivisions,
Yeah.
they're regulated by the Housing and Land Use Regulatory Board,
Okay.
or HLURB.
HLURB. Okay.
So they need development permits and licenses to sell from them.
Okay.
And they have to meet certain standards for site suitability.
Okay.
Making sure there are community facilities and open spaces,
Mm-hmm.
making sure there's water and electricity,
Okay.
making sure the lots and buildings are laid out properly.
Yeah.
And they also have to comply with socialized housing requirements under Republic Act.
What?
Not 1779.
Okay. So there are a lot of rules.
Are a lot of rules.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about their financials.
Yeah,
They always wants to know about the money.
that's right.
So what were some of the highlights for 2024?
Okay, so for 2024,
Yeah.
they had gross revenues of 42.02 billion pesos.
Okay.
Their income before income tax was 16.68 billion pesos. Net income was 15.34 billion pesos.
Okay.
Net income attributable to equity holders of the parent company was 13.21 billion pesos.
Okay.
And their basic diluted earnings per share was 2.73 pesos.
Okay, so those are some big numbers.
Yeah.
And how does that compare to the previous years?
So if you look at 2023,
Yeah.
their income before income tax was actually up 10%.
Okay.
Their net income was up 15%.
Okay, so things are moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
Okay.
The net income attributable to the parent company's equity holders was also up 10%.
Okay.
And earnings per share was up 11%.
Okay, so positive growth.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, I did notice that the report mentioned that in 2023,
Yeah.
gross revenues were actually down a bit
Yeah, that's right.
compared to 2022,
Mm-hmm.
which they said was a particularly strong year
Yeah.
due to revenue recognition from a specific project phase.
Mm-hmm.
But even though gross revenues were down,
Yeah.
their EBIT and EBITDA were still up in 2023.
Right.
So it sounds like the business is still fundamentally strong.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, their operations are solid.
So how did each of the business segments contribute to the overall financial performance in 2024?
So Robinson's Malls brought in 16.21 billion pesos in revenue.
Okay.
And 9.28 billion in EBITDA.
Okay, so the malls are doing well.
Yeah, they're doing really well.
Okay.
Robinson's offices had revenue of 7.95 billion pesos.
Okay.
And EBITDA of 6.40 billion.
Okay.
And their total assets were valued at 38.92 billion pesos.
Okay.
RLC residences had realized revenues of 12.01 billion pesos from the residential projects.
Okay.
Robinson's Hotels and Resorts had revenues of 4.56 billion pesos.
Okay, so the hotels are recovering.
Yeah, they're bouncing back.
Good.
And then Robinson's Logistics and Industrial Facilities had revenue of 0.69 billion pesos.
Okay.
So, not as much as the others.
Yeah.
But still contributing.
Still part of the mix.
Exactly.
Okay. So let's move on to sustainability, which is obviously a huge topic these days.
It really is.
So what kind of things is RLC doing in this area?
So they're really committed to sustainability.
Okay.
And they actually have a whole separate sustainability report that goes into detail about all their efforts.
Okay.
They do this thing called a materiality review,
Okay.
where they figure out, what their biggest environmental, social, and economic impacts are.
Okay.
And then they try to align those impacts with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs.
SDG 7.
And their management approach is really focused on a few key things.
Okay.
They want to make sure there's a fair distribution of value to all their stakeholders.
Okay.
They're all about ethical sourcing.
Okay.
In their supply chain.
Mm-hmm.
They're big on local partnerships.
Okay.
And they want to make sure their employees get fair compensation and benefits.
Okay, so it's really a holistic approach.
Yeah.
It is.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So specifically, what are they doing about climate change?
So they've been pretty proactive.
Oh.
They worked with Deloitte.
Yeah.